When a widowed cowboy on the edge of ruin hires a silent woman for $3 a week, he thinks he's found cheap help, until her past walks into his cabin with a loaded gun and a debt to settle. What he doesn't know is that the stranger who destroyed his life years ago is the same man hunting her now. In a land where survival depends on who you trust, Caleb Turner and Evelyn Reed will discover that some debts can only be paid in truth, some wounds only heal together, and some families are built not from blood, but from the courage to stand when everything else has fallen. If you're ready to discover how two broken souls build something unbreakable on the Wyoming frontier, stay with me until the very end. And when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind came hard across the Wyoming plains that October morning, carrying the smell of dust and coming snow. Caleb Turner stood in the doorway of his cabin, one hand braced against the frame, the other hanging useless at his side. He'd stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night 6 months ago, stopped shaving 4 months back, stopped trying to hide the tremor in his hands about 2 weeks past. His wife had been dead for 8 months. The farm was dying with her. Behind him, the cabin groaned with the weight of 4 children who no longer laughed, a roof that leaked in 3 places, and a silence so heavy it had texture. He could feel it pressing against his shoulders like wet wool, suffocating and cold. "Pa?" The voice came small and uncertain from somewhere inside. Caleb didn't turn. His youngest, Emma, only spoke in questions now. Every statement had become a hesitant probe, testing whether the world would collapse if she said the wrong thing. "What is it, girl?" "Is there—" She paused. He could picture her there in the dim kitchen, 6 years old with her mother's eyes, twisting her hands in her apron the way Sarah used to when she was thinking. "Is there breakfast?" The question cut deeper than it should have. Not because she was hungry, though she was, they all were, but because she'd learned to ask instead of expect. Because in 8 months he'd taught his children that nothing was certain anymore. Not meals, not warmth, not safety, not him. "Get your brothers up," he said, voice rougher than he intended. "I'll see what we got." What they had was cornmeal, a few eggs from the hens that hadn't stopped laying yet, and half a sack of beans that wouldn't last the week. The garden had failed in August when he'd been too grief-drunk to water it properly. The cattle he'd sold off in September to pay the land note. The horse had thrown a shoe he couldn't afford to replace. The town of Clements Ridge lay 8 miles south, close enough to feel its judgment, far enough that help never came. Caleb stood at the stove, methodically mixing cornmeal with water, his hands working while his mind wandered to places it shouldn't go. To the bottle he'd buried behind the barn 3 weeks ago after he'd woken up in the yard with Emma crying over him, thinking he was dead. To the rifle that hung over the door and the dark thoughts that came in the hours before dawn when the children were asleep and the world was nothing but wind and emptiness. To Sarah's grave on the hill where the wildflowers he'd planted had all died. "Pa?" This time it was Daniel, his oldest at 12, standing in the doorway with his shoulders already carrying the weight of a man twice his age. "The north fence is down again. I can fix it, but we need wire. We need a lot of things." "I could ride to town." "No." The word came out harder than Caleb meant it, and Daniel flinched. The boy had been trying to be the man of the house since the day Sarah died, and Caleb knew he should feel grateful, should feel proud, should feel something other than this hollow ache that made him want to tell his son the truth. That the fence didn't matter because they'd lose the land before winter anyway, that riding to town meant facing the stares and whispers of people who'd stopped pretending to care, that there was no wire and no money and no point. But he didn't say any of that. "I'll handle it," Caleb said instead, which was a lie they both recognized. The children ate in silence. Emma and her twin brother Joseph pushed cornmeal around their plates, too young to hide their disappointment. 10-year-old Rebecca ate mechanically, her eyes distant, already learning to swallow feelings along with food. Daniel didn't eat at all, just sat with his jaw tight and his hands clenched, trying to solve problems that had no solutions. Caleb watched them and felt the failure crushing his chest like a physical weight. This wasn't what Sarah would have wanted. She'd been the heart of this family, the warmth that made a house feel like home. She'd sung while cooking, laughed at his terrible jokes, tucked the children in with stories every night. She'd made him believe he was a good man, a good father, worthy of the life they'd built together. Then cholera had swept through in February, and she was gone in 3 days. He'd buried her on a Thursday. By Friday, he'd realized he had no idea how to do any of this without her. "Daniel," Caleb said as the boy stood to clear his plate, "you're right about the fence. We need help." Something flickered in his son's eyes. Hope, maybe, or just surprise that his father had actually heard him. "There's a hiring post at Clements Ridge," Caleb continued, forcing the words out. "I'll ride in today, see if we can find someone willing to work for what we can afford." Which was almost nothing. "What about the McAllisters?" Rebecca asked quietly. "They have 3 hands. Maybe Mr. McAllister would—" "No," Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The McAllisters were good people, and they'd offered help more than once. But he'd heard what they said after Sarah's funeral, the same thing the whole town said. Poor Caleb Turner can't even keep his wife alive. How's he going to raise 4 children alone? He'd rather starve than prove them right by begging. The ride to Clements Ridge took 2 hours on the unshodden horse, every step a reminder of how far he'd fallen. The town sprawled at the base of the mountains like something permanent and confident, its main street lined with businesses that thrived while his farm withered. He could feel eyes on him as he rode past the mercantile, the bank, the hotel, where men with clean hands and full bellies made decisions about who deserved credit and who didn't. The hiring post stood outside the saloon, a weathered board where ranchers pinned notices seeking cow hands, cooks, farm hands. Caleb pulled a stub of pencil from his pocket and a scrap of paper he'd torn from one of Sarah's old recipe books, the only paper he had left. His hand shook as he wrote. "Help wanted, farm work, cooking, children, 3-hour week, room and board. Turner Homestead, 8 miles north, $3. It was an insult. The going rate for decent help was $10 to $15 a week, more if you wanted someone skilled. $3 might get you a drifter too drunk to work anywhere else, or someone so desperate they'd take anything. But $3 was all he had. Caleb pinned the notice to the board and stepped back, staring at his own handwriting. The letters looked as defeated as he felt, uneven and faint, the writing of a man who'd stopped believing his words mattered. That's a mighty thin wage, friend. Caleb turned to find Ben Parker leaning against the saloon doorway, arms crossed. Parker owned the livery and had been one of the pallbearers at Sarah's funeral. A good man, but one who'd watched Caleb's decline with the careful distance of someone who doesn't know how to help. "It's what I got," Caleb said. "You know what you'll get for $3? Someone running from the law, or, I know." Caleb cut him off, too tired to hear the lecture. "I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for help." Parker's expression softened. "How are those kids, Caleb?" "Fine." "And you?" Caleb met his eyes and for just a moment considered telling the truth, that he woke up every morning wishing he hadn't, that his children looked at him like a stranger, that the farm his grandfather had built and his father had expanded was slipping through his fingers like water, that he was 34 years old and felt ancient, hollowed out, finished. "Fine," he repeated. Parker nodded slowly, recognizing the lie but respecting it. "Well, I hope you find someone." Caleb hoped so too, though hope felt like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. He was halfway to his horse when he heard the voice. "That notice yours?" Caleb turned. The woman stood in the shadow of the mercantile overhang, and his first thought was that she looked like she'd been carved from the same hard prairie stone as the mountains behind town. Tall and lean, dressed in men's work clothes that had seen better years, her hair pulled back severe and practical. She might have been 30 or 40. The frontier had a way of aging people past easy counting, but it was her eyes that stopped him. Gray as winter sky, and just as unforgiving. "It is," Caleb said. $3 a week? That's right. Room and board included? Such as it is. She studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away. He had the unsettling sense that she could see past the dirt and exhaustion to the broken thing underneath, and was calculating whether it was worth her time. "I can work," she said finally. "I know farming, cooking, animals. I'm strong, I don't complain, and I don't ask questions." "What's your name?" A pause so brief he almost missed it. "Evelyn Reed." "You got references, Miss Reed? Someone who can vouch for you? No. The answer was flat, leaving no room for negotiation. Caleb should have walked away right then. Should have listened to the warning bells ringing in his head that said a woman alone, asking for work at poverty wages, with no references and eyes that looked like they'd seen things they wanted to forget. That was trouble waiting to happen. But he thought of his children eating watery cornmeal, of the north fence down and winter coming, of the silence in his house that tasted like giving up. When can you start? He heard himself ask. Now. You got belongings to collect? She lifted a worn canvas bag he hadn't noticed at her feet. Everything she owned, apparently, fit in something smaller than a feed sack. I'll need to see the place first, she said. Make sure it's suitable. Caleb almost laughed at that. Suitable, as if either of them had the luxury of being particular. Fair enough, he said, but I should tell you straight, it's not much. The cabin's rough, the work's hard, and my children... He paused, searching for words. They've had a difficult time. Most people have. She said it without sympathy or judgment, just a statement of fact that somehow made Caleb feel less alone than he had in months. They rode north in silence, Evelyn perched behind him on the unshodden horse that limped but didn't complain. The sun climbed toward noon, burning off the morning chill, and the plains stretched endless and indifferent around them. Caleb found himself acutely aware of the woman at his back. The way she sat perfectly still, barely touching him, as if she'd learned to take up as little space as possible in the world. You married? He asked, more to break the silence than because he cared. No. Got family? No. Where you from? East. Each answer was a door closing, and Caleb got the message. Whatever Evelyn Reed was running from, she wasn't interested in sharing. Part of him wanted to press, to know who he was bringing into his home, around his children. But a larger part, the tired, desperate part that was barely holding on, decided it didn't matter. She could work. That was enough. The homestead came into view just after noon, and Caleb saw it the way Evelyn must have. A sagging cabin with a roof that looked like it might not survive the next good wind, a barn listing to one side, fences down in 3 places, weeds choking what had been Sarah's vegetable garden. The hill where she was buried rose behind it all, marked by a simple wooden cross he'd carved himself, because even the gravestone had been too expensive. It looked like defeat. This is it, Caleb said, hearing the apology in his voice. Evelyn dismounted without comment and stood surveying the property with those cold gray eyes. He waited for her to make an excuse, to say this wasn't what she'd expected, to walk away like any sensible person would. Instead, she said, Where do I sleep? Relief hit him so hard his knees almost buckled. There's a room off the kitchen, he managed. It's small, but it's private. That'll do. The children were in the yard when they arrived, having abandoned whatever pretense of chores they'd been attempting. They clustered together near the porch steps, Rebecca in front, protective, with Emma and Joseph pressed behind her like nervous birds, and Daniel standing apart, trying to look older than 12. Kids, Caleb said, dismounting. This is Miss Reed. She's going to be helping around the place. 4 pairs of eyes stared at Evelyn with expressions ranging from suspicion to fear to something that might have been hope. Evelyn stared back, unflinching. You the oldest? She asked Daniel. Yes, ma'am. What's your name? Daniel Turner. You know how to fix fence? Daniel Turner. The boy straightened. Yes, ma'am. Good. Show me where the wire is, and we'll get started. She walked past Caleb without waiting for permission, following Daniel toward the barn like she'd already decided this place was hers to manage. The other children looked at their father, confused, and Caleb realized he was confused too. He'd expected questions, adjustment, maybe some feminine need to settle in first. What he got was a woman who started working before she'd even set down her bag. By sundown, the north fence was repaired. Caleb watched from the porch as Evelyn and Daniel worked the wire, her movements economical and sure, his eager and clumsy. She didn't coddle him or criticize, just showed him once and then let him try, correcting his grip when the wire slipped, steadying the post when he couldn't hold it alone. It was the most alive Daniel had looked in months. Rebecca appeared at Caleb's elbow, quiet as smoke. Is she staying? That's the plan. What if we don't like her? It was the first time Rebecca had expressed an opinion about anything since her mother died. Caleb turned to look at his daughter, seeing Sarah's stubborn chin and his own wariness. "Then we'll figure it out," he said. "But right now we need the help, Becca. You understand?" She nodded, but her eyes stayed on Evelyn, watchful and withholding judgment. Dinner that night was beans and cornbread that Evelyn made without asking where anything was kept, moving through the kitchen like she could sense the logic of the space. She served the children first, then Caleb, then took a small portion for herself and ate standing at the counter, her back to them all. The meal passed in painful silence, broken only by the scrape of spoons and Emma's small cough. "Thank you, ma'am," Joseph whispered when he finished, the first words he'd spoken all day. Evelyn looked at him, really looked, with a focus that made the boy duck his head, and nodded once. After dinner, she retreated to the small room off the kitchen without ceremony. Caleb heard the door close, then nothing. No sounds of settling in, no movements, just silence that felt oddly final, as if she'd drawn a line between her space and theirs that wasn't meant to be crossed. He sat on the porch as darkness fell, smoking the last of the tobacco he'd been rationing, watching stars emerge in a sky too vast to comprehend. Behind him, he could hear Rebecca getting the twins ready for bed, her voice low and maternal beyond her years. Daniel joined him on the steps, settling close, but not touching. "She knows what she's doing," the boy said. "With the fence, I mean. And she said tomorrow we'd tackle the barn roof." "That's so." Pa... Daniel hesitated. "Do you think she'll stay?" Caleb looked at his son, at the fragile hope in his eyes, and felt something crack inside his chest. Because Daniel wasn't just asking about Evelyn. He was asking if anything good would ever stay again, or if loss was just the way life worked now. "I don't know, son," Caleb said honestly, "but I hope so." That night, lying in the bed he used to share with Sarah, staring at the ceiling he kept meaning to patch, Caleb tried to make sense of the strange woman sleeping in his kitchen. She'd given him nothing, no history, no warmth, no promises, just work and silence and those watchful gray eyes. But she'd fixed the fence. It was something. The days that followed took on a rhythm Caleb had forgotten was possible. Evelyn rose before dawn and worked until after dark, moving through tasks with mechanical efficiency. She repaired the barn roof with Daniel, cleaned out the chicken coop, patched the worst holes in the cabin walls. She cooked simple meals that filled empty stomachs and kept the kitchen cleaner than it had been in months. But she remained completely, utterly separate. She never ate with them, never joined evening conversations, never smiled or softened or gave any indication that she was part of the family rather than just a hired hand who happened to sleep indoors. The children learned to work around her silence, to stop expecting answers to their questions, to accept that Miss Reed was a functional part of their lives, but not a person they would ever really know. Rebecca remained suspicious. "She's hiding something," she told Caleb one evening as they watched Evelyn haul water from the well with strength that seemed impossible for her lean frame. "We're all hiding something," Caleb replied, which was truer than he meant it to be. Emma tried the hardest to reach her, offering small gifts, a flower, a drawing, a smooth stone, that Evelyn accepted with a nod, but no warmth. The little girl would stand at the kitchen doorway sometimes, just watching, as if she could solve the puzzle of this silent woman through sheer observation. Joseph gave up trying and ignored her completely, which seemed to suit Evelyn fine. Only Daniel connected with her, and only through work. They developed a wordless communication in the barn and fields, Evelyn teaching him things with gestures and demonstrations rather than explanations. How to brace a post so it wouldn't lean. How to tell if a hen was egg-bound. How to sharpen a blade so it held its edge. Caleb watched these silent lessons and felt both grateful and inadequate. He should have been teaching his son these things. Should have been the one fixing fences and roofs and the 100 other things slowly falling apart. But he wasn't. So he let Evelyn do it and tried not to think too hard about what that made him. 3 weeks after Evelyn arrived, the first snow came. Caleb woke to a world transformed, white and muffled and clean, covering all the farm's failures under a blanket of temporary perfection. He found Evelyn already outside, splitting wood with steady rhythmic strokes, her breath clouding in the cold air. "Should have done this last month," she said without looking at him. "Wood's not seasoned proper." "I know." "We'll need twice as much as you got stacked." "I know." She finally looked at him, and something in her expression shifted, not softening exactly, but acknowledging. Then I guess we better get to work. They spent the day in the timber at the edge of his property, felling dead trees and hauling them back on the horse-drawn sledge he'd thought he'd have to sell. Evelyn worked with the same relentless efficiency she brought to everything, but out here, away from the children and the cabin, she seemed fractionally less guarded. "You do this before?" Caleb asked as they took a brief rest. "Farm work?" "Some." "Where?" She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Kansas?" "Long time ago." It was the most personal information she'd offered, and Caleb had the sense he was supposed to let it be. But curiosity and something else, loneliness maybe, or the simple human need for connection, pushed him forward. "What brought you out here?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Needed a change." "That why you got no references? Left in a hurry?" Her eyes cut to him, sharp as the axe in her hand. "You want me to go?" "No." The answer came faster than he intended. "No, I just—" "Then stop asking questions." She turned back to the tree, and the conversation was over. They worked in silence until dusk, hauling the last load back as the sun bled red across the snow. The children had watched for them, and Emma ran out when the sledge appeared, her face bright with relief that made Caleb's chest ache. "We thought you got lost," she cried, grabbing his hand. "Just took longer than expected, sweetheart." Emma looked up at Evelyn, still holding her father's hand like an anchor. "Were you scared, Miss Reed?" "No." "Why not?" Evelyn climbed down from the sledge, her movements stiff from cold and exertion. She looked at Emma with those unreadable gray eyes. "Because being scared doesn't help," she said simply. That night, after the children were in bed, Caleb found Evelyn on the porch, despite the cold, staring out at the snow-covered darkness. He almost left her to it. She'd made clear she valued solitude, but something about the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself so rigidly still, suggested a person forcing themselves not to break. He knew that posture. He lived that posture. "Cold night," he said, stepping outside. "I've had colder." Caleb leaned against the rail beside her, close, but not intruding. "You did good work today. It's what you pay me for." $3 a week is barely pay. It's enough. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the whisper of wind through snow-laden branches. Caleb pulled out his tobacco, rolling a cigarette more from habit than desire. "My wife," he heard himself say, "she died 8 months back. Cholera." Evelyn didn't respond, didn't move. "I didn't know how to do any of this without her," Caleb continued, the words tumbling out now that he'd started. "The kids, the farm, just being. She was the one who made it all make sense, and when she was gone, it was like—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Like someone had blown out a lamp and I couldn't remember how to see in the dark." Still nothing from Evelyn. "I know you don't want to hear this," Caleb said. "I know you got your own troubles, and you didn't come here to listen to mine. But I figure you should know. That notice in town, the $3, all of it, I was desperate. I am desperate. So if you're running from something and it catches up, or if you decide one day this place isn't worth your time, I need to know sooner rather than later. For the kids." Evelyn turned to look at him then, and in the moonlight her face looked carved from marble, beautiful and merciless. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. "How can you be sure?" "Because I don't have anywhere else to go." The truth of it hung in the frozen air between them, two people at the end of their respective ropes, bound together by necessity and $3 a week and nothing else. It should have felt hopeless. Instead, strangely, it felt like the first honest thing that had happened to Caleb in months. "All right then," he said. "All right." December came hard and fast, burying the farm under snow that didn't melt. The world contracted to the cabin, the barn, the narrow paths they shoveled between buildings. Time moved differently in winter, slower and faster at once, days blending together in a haze of wood smoke and cold and the constant battle against freezing. But something was changing. Caleb noticed it first in Daniel, the way his son moved with more confidence, stood straighter, spoke with more authority about the farm. Evelyn had given the boy responsibility, and he'd risen to meet it. Then in Rebecca, whose suspicion had gradually transformed into grudging respect. She'd started helping Evelyn with dinner preparations, working alongside her in the same companionable silence that defined all of Evelyn's interactions. Even the twins had adjusted, accepting Evelyn as part of the landscape, unchanging, reliable, there. Only Caleb remained uncertain, caught between gratitude for what Evelyn had brought to his family and unease about how much he'd come to depend on someone he didn't really know. It was Rebecca who forced the issue one evening in late December, cornering him in the barn while he fed the remaining livestock. "Pa, can I ask you something?" "Course, honey." "Do you trust Miss Reed?" Caleb paused, pitchfork halfway to the hay. It was the question he'd been avoiding asking himself. "I think so," he said carefully. "Why?" "Because Emma loves her." Caleb turned to his daughter, surprised. "What?" "Emma loves her," Rebecca repeated. "She doesn't say it, but I can tell. The way she watches Miss Reed, follows her around when she can, tries to make her smile." Rebecca's expression was solemn. Older than 10 had any right to be. "I just don't want Emma to get hurt if Miss Reed leaves." "We're all going to get hurt if she leaves," Caleb admitted. "Then maybe you should make sure she stays." "I'm paying her what I can." "That's not what I mean." Rebecca stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Miss Reed doesn't care about money, Pa. Haven't you noticed? She hasn't spent a penny since she got here. She's not here for the $3. "Then why is she here?" His daughter looked at him with Sarah's eyes and said, "I think she's hiding, and I think maybe we're helping her hide." The words settled over Caleb like snow, covering everything in a layer of cold possibility. That night, he watched Evelyn more carefully during dinner, watched the way her eyes constantly tracked the door, the windows, any point of entry, watched how she positioned herself with her back to the wall, watched the way she tensed at unexpected sounds, relaxing only when she'd identified the source. These weren't the habits of someone simply looking for work. These were the habits of someone running. After the children were in bed, Caleb found Evelyn in her usual spot on the porch, wrapped in one of Sarah's old coats he'd offered her when the temperature dropped. She looked small in it, almost fragile, which he knew was an illusion. "Rebecca thinks you're hiding from something," he said without preamble. Evelyn's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. "Smart girl. Is she right? Does it matter?" "Yeah," Caleb said. "It does. Because if trouble's coming, I need to know. I got 4 children to protect." "No one's coming." "You sure about that?" Silence. "Evelyn?" He moved to stand beside her, forcing her to look at him. "I meant what I said before. I need to know if something's going to blow back on us." She met his eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw something break in her expression. Just a crack, but enough to glimpse the fear underneath. "There was a man," she said finally, voice low. "Back in Kansas. He wasn't good. I worked for him, trusted him, and he—" She stopped, jaw working. "He destroyed people. Not with fists or guns, but with lies and debt and legal tricks. He'd find folks who were struggling, offer help, then trap them until they lost everything." "And you worked for him?" "I kept his books, did his correspondence. I didn't know what he was doing at first, but when I figured it out..." She pulled the coat tighter. "I took evidence, documents proving what he'd done. I was going to take them to the territorial marshal, but he found out. Came after me." "Did he hurt you?" "No, I ran first." Evelyn's laugh was bitter. "Been running for 2 years. Kansas to Colorado to Wyoming, working whatever jobs I could find, never staying long enough for anyone to ask questions." Caleb processed this, fitting pieces together. "Why'd you stop running? Why here?" "Because I'm tired." The admission came out broken. "Because I looked at your notice offering $3 for work no one else would take, and I thought maybe a man that desperate wouldn't ask too many questions. Maybe I could just exist for a while, without looking over my shoulder." "What's his name? The man you're running from?" Evelyn hesitated, then, "Grant Hale." The name hit Caleb like a physical blow. His vision tunneled, breath catching in his throat, because he knew that name. Everyone in Wyoming knew that name. Grant Hale, land speculator, businessman, respected citizen, the man who'd sold Caleb the mortgage on his farm, the man who was slowly, methodically, foreclosing on half the homesteads in 3 counties. You know him. Evelyn was staring at him now, reading the recognition on his face. He holds my note, Caleb managed. The mortgage on this place. They looked at each other in the cold December dark, and the weight of it crashed down between them, the impossible, terrible coincidence that wasn't really coincidence at all. How long do you have? Evelyn asked quietly. 2 months? Maybe 3 if I can scrape together part of what I owe. You can't. Her voice was flat with certainty. That's how he works. He makes it impossible to pay, then takes everything. Caleb felt the old despair rising, the darkness that had been his companion since Sarah died. But underneath it, something else stirred, something sharp and angry and alive. The documents you took, he said. Do you still have them? Hidden. Why? Because maybe, Caleb said slowly, we stop running. Evelyn stared at him like he'd suggested they fly to the moon. Stop running, she repeated slowly. You don't understand what you're saying. Grant Hale isn't just some crooked businessman. He owns half the territorial government. Judges, marshals, land office clerks, they're all in his pocket. Then we go higher. There is no higher. Not in Wyoming. She stepped back, shaking her head. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Caleb, but this isn't your fight. You've got children to think about. A farm to save. The last thing you need is to make an enemy of the man who holds your mortgage. He's already my enemy. He's been my enemy since the day he sold me that note. Caleb's voice was harder than he'd heard it in months. You know what Sarah and I paid for this land? $1,500 cash, money we'd saved for 8 years. Then Hale came around right after we closed, all friendly smiles, telling us about improvements we'd need to make to meet new territorial standards. Fences, a deeper well, expanded barn. Said he could arrange financing at favorable rates. Let me guess, Evelyn said quietly. The rates weren't favorable. 12% interest, compounding monthly. By the time I understood what I'd signed, I owed him $3,000 on top of what we'd already paid. The old anger burned in Caleb's chest, clean and clarifying. Sarah worked herself sick trying to help me make the payments. Took in washing, sold eggs, did sewing for town ladies who looked down on her. And I let her because I was too proud to admit I'd been played for a fool. Evelyn's expression shifted, something like recognition crossing her face. That's his pattern. Find people who are just making it, offer help that's really a trap, then squeeze until there's nothing left. How many people has he done this to? In Kansas? Dozens that I know of, probably more I didn't see. She turned away, gripping the porch rail. Families lost their farms, their homes. One man put a gun in his mouth when Hale foreclosed 3 days before Christmas. That's when I knew I had to do something. What's in the documents you took? Everything. Falsified land assessments, forged signatures on loan modifications, records of bribes paid to county officials, evidence of deals he made with railroad companies to drive property values down so he could buy cheap and sell high. It's all there, going back 5 years. Caleb felt something shift inside him, like a door opening onto a possibility he hadn't dared imagine. That's enough to destroy him. In theory, but who are we going to show it to? The territorial marshal? Hale plays cards with him every Thursday. The federal land office. Half those men owe Hale favors. Evelyn's laugh was bitter. I had this same thought 2 years ago. I was going to be the hero who brought him down. Instead, I've been sleeping in barns and hiding in places like this, hoping he'll eventually stop looking. Has he? The question hung between them, and Evelyn's silence was answer enough. He's still hunting you, Caleb said. Men like Grant Hale don't let go of things that threaten them. He knows I have those documents, knows what they could do to him if they ever reached the right people. She looked at Caleb, and her eyes held something that might have been pity. He'll find me eventually, they always do. I was just hoping to have a few quiet months first. Then we use the time we've got. To do what exactly? Storm his office in Cheyenne? We'd be arrested before we got through the door. No, Caleb said slowly, an idea forming. We make him come to us. Evelyn stared at him. That's insane. Maybe. But think about it. Right now, he's looking for you in cities, towns, places where a woman alone might try to disappear. He's not thinking about a failing homestead in the middle of nowhere. We've got the element of surprise. And then what? Even if we get him here, what's the plan? Hold him at gunpoint while we ride to Cheyenne? That's not justice, Caleb. That's just desperation. She wasn't wrong, but Caleb found he didn't care about the difference anymore. Sarah had died trying to meet Hale's impossible demands. His children had spent 8 months learning to live with loss and fear and empty bellies. He'd buried himself in grief and shame while his farm crumbled and his family slowly starved. Enough. There's a federal circuit judge, he said, the pieces clicking together. Comes through Cheyenne 4 times a year. Samuel Garrett. I met him once at a cattlemen's meeting back when I could afford those things. He's got a reputation for being honest, maybe the only truly clean judge in the territory. When's he next in Cheyenne? March. That's 3 months away, which gives us time to prepare. Caleb could feel it now, the first genuine hope he'd felt since Sarah died. We document everything, your evidence plus testimony from other families Hale has ruined. We get it in front of Judge Garrett before Hale knows what's happening. Evelyn shook her head slowly, but he could see her wavering. You're talking about taking on one of the most powerful men in Wyoming with nothing but some old documents and hope. You got a better idea? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. They stood in the cold darkness, breath clouding between them, and Caleb saw the exact moment she made her decision. Her shoulders straightened, her jaw set, and those gray eyes went hard as winter ice. If we're doing this, she said, we do it right. That means we need more than documents. We need witnesses willing to testify. People he's destroyed who'll stand up in court and tell their stories. I know at least 3 families in this county alone, and they have to be willing to risk Hale's retribution. He'll come after anyone who speaks against him. Then we make sure the risk is worth it. Caleb extended his hand. Partners? Evelyn looked at his hand for a long moment, and he wondered what she was weighing, the danger against the possibility, the fear against the exhaustion of running, the safety of anonymity against the chance to finally fight back. She gripped his hand, her palm rough with calluses, her grip stronger than seemed possible. Partners, she agreed. The next morning, Caleb rode to the McAllister Ranch 8 miles west. He'd avoided Thomas McAllister since Sarah's funeral, too proud to accept help, too ashamed to face a man who'd offered friendship when Caleb had nothing to give in return. But pride was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. Thomas was in the barn when Caleb arrived, a big man with kind eyes who'd homesteaded in Wyoming the same year Caleb had. They'd helped each other raise barns, round up strays, survive the brutal winter of '83. Their wives had been friends. Their children had played together. Then Sarah died, and Caleb had retreated into grief so complete he'd severed every connection that reminded him of what he'd lost. Caleb Turner. Thomas set down the harness he'd been mending, surprise and wariness crossing his face. This is unexpected. I know, I'm sorry for... Caleb stopped, forced himself to be honest. I'm sorry for disappearing, for not being the friend you deserved. You were grieving. I was drowning. There's a difference. Caleb dismounted, his legs unsteady. Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Your mortgage, who holds it? Thomas's expression closed. Why? Because mine's held by Grant Hale, and I'm guessing yours is too. The silence that followed confirmed it. He came around about 3 years back, Thomas said finally. Offered to consolidate some debts we'd taken on after a bad winter. Said he could get us better terms than the local bank. He laughed bitterly. Turned out better terms meant higher interest and penalties for early payment. How much do you owe him? $4,000. On a property worth maybe $2,000. Thomas leaned against a stall, suddenly looking older than his 40 years. We're 3 payments behind. He sent a letter last month saying if we don't catch up by spring, he's foreclosing. What if I told you there's a way to fight back? Thomas's eyes sharpened. I'd say you're either desperate or crazy. Both, probably. Caleb glanced toward the barn door, making sure they were alone. I've got someone staying at my place. Woman named Evelyn Reed. She used to work for Hale, knows how he operates. She took documents that prove he's been running a land fraud scheme for years. Documents can be explained away. Hale's got lawyers. Not if we've got witnesses, families willing to testify about what he did to them. Caleb stepped closer. There's a federal judge coming to Cheyenne in March. Honest man by all accounts. If we can get in front of him with evidence and testimony, we might actually have a chance. Thomas studied him, weighing the offer. And if we fail, if Hale finds out we're moving against him, then we're no worse off than we already are. He's taking our land anyway, Thomas. At least this way we go down fighting. You got kids to think about, Caleb. So do I. Which is exactly why we have to try. Caleb heard the intensity in his own voice, felt it burning through the fog of grief that had obscured everything for so long. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of watching my children go hungry while men like Hale get rich off our suffering. Sarah died trying to make his payments, and I'll be damned if I let that be for nothing. Thomas was quiet for a long time, his weathered hands working the harness leather like a rosary. Finally, he nodded. All right, count me in. But we'll need more than just us. I'm working on that. They talked for another hour, building a list of families in 3 counties who'd fallen into Hale's trap. The Hendersons, who'd lost their ranch after Hale raised their interest rate without notice. The Kowalskis, whose daughter had died because they couldn't afford a doctor after making a mortgage payment. The Chengs, who'd been driven off land they'd worked for 15 years when Hale claimed their deed was invalid. By the time Caleb rode home, the sun was setting and his head was full of names and stories and the awful arithmetic of Hale's destruction. He'd ruined dozens of families, stolen thousands of acres, and built an empire on the broken backs of people who'd trusted him. But he'd also made enemies. And enemies, properly organized, could become an army. Evelyn was waiting on the porch when he returned, wrapped in Sarah's coat, her expression unreadable. How'd it go? McAllister's in, says he knows at least 5 other families who might be willing to testify. Something flickered in Evelyn's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hope. That's more than I expected. Turns out a lot of people would like to see Grant Hale answer for what he's done. They just needed someone to take the first step. Caleb dismounted, his body aching from a full day in the saddle. How were the kids? Fine. Daniel fixed the leak in the chicken coop. Rebecca got the twins through their lessons. Emma made soup. It was the most Evelyn had ever said about the children in one breath, and Caleb filed that detail away as significant. She made soup? She wanted to help. I showed her how. Evelyn's mouth almost curved into a smile. She's got good instincts. They stood in the gathering darkness, and Caleb realized this was the longest conversation they'd had that wasn't about work or survival. For the first time since she'd arrived, Evelyn seemed almost relaxed, the rigid tension in her shoulders fractionally eased. Can I ask you something? He said. Why'd you really take those documents? It wasn't just about stopping Hale. Evelyn was quiet, her gaze distant. There was a family in Kansas, the Bradfords. They had a little girl, maybe 8 years old. Sarah, her name was. Caleb went very still at the name. Hale foreclosed on them 2 days before Christmas, sent men to evict them in a snowstorm. Evelyn's voice had gone flat, emotionless in the way of someone recounting unbearable things. They had nowhere to go. The father tried to fight the eviction, and Hale had him arrested. The mother and daughter ended up in a boarding house that caught fire that winter. The girl died. Sarah died. Jesus. I kept Hale's books. I knew what he was doing, but I told myself it was just business, legal, even if it wasn't moral. Then that little girl died, and I couldn't... She stopped, swallowed hard. I couldn't pretend anymore. Caleb understood then. It wasn't just about justice or revenge. It was about atonement. Evelyn had been complicit in Hale's crimes, and she was trying to make it right the only way she knew how. The documents, he said. Where are they? Safe. Evelyn, I'll get them when we need them. Right now, the fewer people who know where they are, the better. She turned to him, and her eyes held a warning. Once we start this, we can't stop halfway. Hale will come after us with everything he has. You need to be sure you're ready for that. I'm sure. What about the children? If this goes wrong... If this goes wrong, we lose the farm anyway. At least this way we tried. Caleb met her gaze steadily. I won't let Hale take everything from us without a fight. Not again. Evelyn nodded slowly, and Caleb saw respect in her expression for the first time since they'd met. All right then, we'll need to be smart about this. Careful. Hale has eyes everywhere. Then we keep it quiet. Just us and the families we can trust. And we prepare for the worst. Caleb thought about his children sleeping inside, about the farm that had been in his family for 2 generations, about Sarah's grave on the hill, and all the promises he'd made and broken. I've been living the worst for 8 months, he said. At least now I'm doing something about it. The weeks that followed took on a new urgency. Caleb rode out to neighboring homesteads, speaking quietly with men and women who'd suffered under Hale's schemes. Some refused outright, too afraid of retribution. Others listened with hungry eyes, desperate for any chance to strike back at the man who'd ruined them. By January, they had 8 families committed to testifying. By February, 12. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Caleb would arrive, share his story, mention Evelyn's documents, and watch hope kindle in faces that had learned to expect only disappointment. Some wanted revenge, others just wanted their dignity back. But they all wanted Hale to answer for what he'd done. At home, life continued with a strange new normalcy. Evelyn remained distant but present, her silence becoming comfortable rather than oppressive. She taught Daniel advanced farming techniques learned from her Kansas years. She showed Rebecca how to preserve food and manage household accounts. She even coaxed Emma into helping with daily tasks, the little girl blooming under the attention. Only with Caleb did Evelyn maintain careful boundaries, never allowing their conversations to drift too far from practical matters. But he'd catch her watching him sometimes with an expression he couldn't quite read, calculation mixed with something softer, concern perhaps, or the beginning of trust. It was Rebecca who noticed the change in the household first. We're different now, she told Caleb one evening as they fed the chickens. Not like before Mama died, but not as sad. You think so? Miss Reed makes us work, but she doesn't treat us like we're fragile. Like we might break if things aren't perfect. Rebecca scattered grain with practiced efficiency. I like that. Your mama would have liked her too, I think. Really? Rebecca looked surprised. But they're so different. Mama was warm and Miss Reed is sharp, Caleb supplied, like a knife. But a knife's a useful tool, honey, especially when things need cutting through. Rebecca considered this, then nodded. Are you and Miss Reed friends now? I don't know if Evelyn Reed has friends, but we're something. Good. Because Emma loves her, and I don't want Emma to get hurt. It was the second time Rebecca had mentioned this, and Caleb realized his 10-year-old daughter had been paying closer attention than he'd thought. Emma did follow Evelyn everywhere the woman allowed, soaking up her presence like parched earth absorbing rain. He found Emma that evening in the kitchen, helping Evelyn prepare dinner with serious concentration. The little girl was carefully peeling potatoes while Evelyn worked on a chicken, their movements synchronized in comfortable silence. That's good, Emma, Evelyn said quietly. Nice and thin with the peel. Emma beamed and Caleb's heart clenched at the joy in his daughter's face. She hadn't smiled like that since Sarah died. Miss Reed? Emma said after a moment. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Are you going to stay with us forever? Evelyn's hand stilled on the chicken. Caleb held his breath, knowing how much weight his daughter had placed on that question. I don't know about forever, Evelyn said finally, but I'm not planning on leaving soon. Good? Emma went back to her potato. Because I think we need you. Evelyn glanced up, catching Caleb's eye across the kitchen, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of the weight they both carried, the responsibility they'd somehow come to share. I need you too, Evelyn said softly, and Caleb wasn't sure if she was talking to Emma or all of them, but it didn't matter. It was enough. February brought bitter cold and news that made Caleb's stomach drop. Thomas McAllister rode over one morning, his face grim, and handed Caleb a notice. Hale's making his move, Thomas said. Sent foreclosure papers to everyone who's been talking to you. All of us are due to lose our land by March 1st unless we pay in full. Caleb scanned the document, his chest tightening. $3,000 due in 3 weeks. It might as well have been 3 million. He knows, Thomas continued. Somehow he knows we're organizing against him. How? Does it matter? Point is, he's accelerating the timeline, forcing our hand. Evelyn emerged from the barn, reading the situation from their expressions. What happened? Caleb handed her the notice. She read it quickly, her jaw tightening. This is Hale's standard intimidation tactic. He wants you scared and scrambling. It's working, Thomas said. No. Evelyn's voice was hard. This is good. Both men stared at her. He's rushing because he's worried, she explained. If he felt secure, he'd let the foreclosures proceed on schedule. But he's hearing whispers, feeling pressure, so he's trying to shut us down before we can organize. She looked at Caleb. When's Judge Garrett due in Cheyenne? 3 weeks. Same as the foreclosure deadline. That's not coincidence. Evelyn paced, her mind clearly working through implications. Hale's trying to take your land before you can get in front of the judge, which means he's afraid of what you might say. What do we do? Thomas asked. We move faster than he expects, stop gathering witnesses, and go straight to Cheyenne with what we have. Evelyn turned to Caleb. You, me, and whoever's willing to travel. We camp outside the federal building if we have to, but we get in front of Garrett before Hale can stop us. That's risky, Caleb said. Everything about this is risky, but if we wait, we lose. She held his gaze. Trust me. I know how Hale thinks. Speed is our only advantage. Thomas looked between them. You really think we can beat him? I think we don't have a choice, Evelyn said. Either we try or we spend the rest of our lives running. Caleb thought about his children, about the farm, about Sarah's grave on the hill, about 8 months of grief and failure and slow surrender, about Evelyn standing on his porch that first day, everything she owned in a canvas bag, asking for work, about $3 a week, and the strange partnership that had grown from desperation. We leave in 2 days, he said. Thomas, gather whoever can travel. Evelyn, get those documents ready. We're going to Cheyenne. That night, after the children were asleep, Caleb found Evelyn in her room packing her few belongings with methodical care. She looked up when he knocked, and he saw something in her face he'd never seen before. Fear. Second thoughts? He asked. Third and fourth, too. She tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. I knew this day would come eventually. I just thought I'd have more time. To run? To prepare. To be ready. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, suddenly looking very small. I've been running for 2 years, Caleb. It's all I know how to do anymore. Caleb entered the room, the first time he'd crossed that threshold, and sat beside her, careful to maintain respectful distance. You taught my son how to fix a fence. You kept my family from falling apart. You stood on that porch and told me you weren't going anywhere. He paused. That doesn't sound like running to me. That's different. That's just living. You were living, Evelyn, maybe for the first time in 2 years. She was quiet, her hands clenched in her lap. What if we fail? What if I've dragged you and your children into this and it all falls apart? Then we fail together. But at least we tried. Caleb found himself reaching for her hand, covering her clenched fists with his rough palm. You asked me if I trusted you. The answer's yes. Now I'm asking you the same thing. Evelyn looked at their joined hands, and he watched emotions flicker across her face, too fast to name. Finally, she turned her hand over, gripping his fingers with surprising strength. Yes, she whispered. I trust you. They sat in the quiet darkness, two people who'd been broken by different hands but shared the same determination to stand up anyway. Tomorrow they'd ride to Cheyenne. Tomorrow they'd face Grant Hale and his lawyers and his corruption. Tomorrow they'd discover if justice was real or just another frontier myth. But tonight, in a small room in a failing homestead, two people who'd learned to survive alone discovered they didn't have to. It was enough. They left before dawn 2 days later, 5 riders on horses that had seen better days, carrying everything that mattered in saddlebags and hope. Caleb rode in front with Evelyn beside him, the documents sewn into the lining of her coat where no casual search would find them. Thomas McAllister followed with his wife Margaret, and behind them came John Henderson, a rancher who'd lost his son's inheritance to one of Hale's schemes and wanted blood more than justice. The children had cried when Caleb said goodbye. Emma had clung to Evelyn's legs, sobbing that she didn't want her to go, and for just a moment Evelyn's careful mask had cracked. She'd knelt down, eye level with the little girl, and touched her cheek with surprising gentleness. "I'm coming back," Evelyn had said, and it sounded like a promise she was making to herself as much as to Emma. Rebecca was staying behind to watch the younger ones, 12 years old, and shouldering responsibility that would have crushed most adults. Caleb had held her tight before leaving, breathing in the smell of her hair, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. "If we're not back in 10 days, he told her, take your brothers and sister to the McAllister's oldest son. He knows to expect you." "You'll be back?" Rebecca had said with a certainty he wished he felt. Now 6 hours into the ride, that certainty felt like something from another lifetime. The landscape rolled past in shades of white and gray, snow-covered plains broken by stands of bare trees, and the occasional ranch house sending smoke signals into the colorless sky. They rode in silence mostly, saving their breath for the cold and the horses for the distance. Cheyenne was 3 days away if the weather held. It didn't. The storm hit on the second day, sweeping down from the mountains with vindictive fury. Snow came sideways, driven by wind that cut through layers of wool and leather like they were nothing. Visibility dropped to a few yards, then to nothing, until they were riding blind through a white nightmare that swallowed sound and direction. "We need to stop," Thomas shouted over the wind. "Find shelter!" Caleb knew he was right, but stopping meant losing time they didn't have. The foreclosure deadline was in 8 days. Judge Garrett would only be in Cheyenne for 2. If they delayed... "Caleb!" Evelyn's voice, sharp with alarm. He turned and saw Margaret McAllister slumped in her saddle, her face gray beneath the ice crusting her scarf. Thomas was trying to hold her upright, but his own hands shook with cold. The decision made itself. They found shelter in a ravine cut into the hillside, just deep enough to break the wind and provide cover for the horses. Caleb and John built a fire while Evelyn tended to Margaret, who was mumbling incoherently, her lips blue with hypothermia. "Get her coat off," Evelyn ordered, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Thomas, your body heat. Lie beside her. John, more wood. Caleb, blankets." They worked in coordinated silence, fighting the cold and the creeping fear that they'd push too hard, risk too much. Margaret's breathing was shallow, her pulse weak, and Caleb could see the terror in Thomas's eyes as he held his wife close. "She's going to be all right," Evelyn said quietly, and Caleb didn't know if it was truth or kindness. They spent the night huddled around that fire, taking turns keeping watch and feeding the flames. The storm screamed overhead like something alive and angry, trying to tear them from their small circle of warmth and fling them into the darkness. Caleb sat with his back against the ravine wall, watching Evelyn work. She'd taken off her own coat to wrap around Margaret, and she sat now in just her shirt and vest, methodically checking the older woman's pulse and temperature every few minutes. Her face was drawn tight with cold and concentration, but her hands never wavered. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked during a quiet moment. "The medical care?" "Kansas. There was a doctor in town who let me help sometimes, said I had good instincts." Evelyn adjusted Margaret's blanket. "Mostly, I just learned what happens when people don't get help fast enough. Like that little girl, Sarah." Evelyn's hands stilled. "Yes, like Sarah." They sat in silence, listening to wind and fire and Margaret's labored breathing. Around them the others dozed fitfully, exhausted by cold and fear. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Evelyn asked suddenly. "Dragging all these people into this fight?" "Every minute. Then why keep going?" Caleb thought about his children sleeping in a cabin that would be taken from them in days, about Thomas holding his unconscious wife, having risked her life because Caleb had asked him to, about all the families who'd pinned their hopes on a stack of documents, and the slim chance that justice might actually exist. "Because stopping is worse," he said. Evelyn looked at him, firelight casting shadows across her face. "You're different than when I met you, stronger. Or more desperate. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." "There's a difference." She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "Desperate people make reckless choices. Strong people make hard ones. You're making hard choices, Caleb." "So are you." I'm just tired of running. That's not why you're here. Caleb shifted closer, drawn by something he didn't have words for. You could have disappeared anywhere, taken those documents and buried them and found some quiet place to hide. But you didn't. You stayed. You fought. That's not exhaustion, Evelyn. That's courage. She looked away, but not before he saw something vulnerable flash across her expression. Don't make me into something I'm not. I'm not. I'm just seeing what's there. The storm finally broke near dawn, leaving behind a world transformed into crystalline silence. Margaret woke with the sun, weak but coherent, and the relief in Thomas's face was almost painful to witness. They ate a cold breakfast of hardtack and jerky, then rode on, pushing hard to make up lost time. Cheyenne appeared on the third day like a promise or a threat, depending on perspective. The territorial capital sprawled across the plains, larger and more permanent than anything Caleb had seen since leaving Kansas. Buildings of brick and stone stood alongside the rough timber structures of the frontier, and the streets teemed with wagons, horses, and people who moved with purpose and prosperity. It was the kind of place Grant Hale would call home. Where do we go first? Thomas asked as they rode down the main street, drawing stares from well-dressed citizens who clearly found their travel-worn group suspicious. The federal building, Evelyn said. Find out when Garrett's hearing cases. The building stood at the center of town, an impressive structure of territorial sandstone that proclaimed federal authority in a place where such things were often flexible. They tied their horses outside and climbed the steps, tracked snow and mud onto polished floors that had probably never seen actual frontier dirt. A clerk looked up from his desk with the particular disdain bureaucrats reserve for people who don't belong. Help you? He asked, though his tone suggested he'd rather not. We need to see Judge Garrett, Caleb said. The judge sees cases by appointment. Do you have one? No, but then you'll need to file a petition. Forms are available. This is urgent, Evelyn interrupted. We have evidence of land fraud affecting multiple counties. Judge Garrett needs to see it before the end of the week. The clerk's expression shifted from disdain to suspicion. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves Grant Hale has been running illegal foreclosure schemes for 5 years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The clerk's face went carefully blank, and Caleb knew with sick certainty that they'd just made their first mistake. I see, the clerk said slowly. Well, that is serious. Let me check the judge's schedule. He disappeared into a back office, and Evelyn grabbed Caleb's arm. We need to leave, she hissed. Right now. What? Why? Because that clerk just went to warn Hale's people. I've seen that look before. He's on the payroll. But it was already too late. The clerk returned with 2 federal marshals, both large men with badges and expressions that suggested they enjoyed their work a little too much. These folks claim to have evidence about Mr. Hale, the clerk said. Thought you might want to have a word. The taller marshal stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. That right? You got accusations to make about Mr. Hale. Not accusations, Caleb said carefully. Documentation. We just want to show Judge Garrett. Judge Garrett's a busy man. Can't see everyone who wanders in with a grievance. The marshal smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Why don't you folks come with us? We'll take your statement, get everything official. We'd prefer to wait for the judge, Evelyn said. I'm sure you would, but that's not how things work here. The marshal's smile hardened. Now, you can come willing, or we can make it difficult. Your choice. Caleb felt the situation spiraling out of control. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, in a building full of people who probably owed Hale favors or feared his retribution. Fighting would accomplish nothing except getting them thrown in jail, or worse. We'll come, he said, ignoring Evelyn's sharp look, but we want it on record that we tried to see Judge Garrett. Sure thing, the marshal gestured toward the door. Right this way. They were led not to an office, but to a holding area in the basement, a windowless room with stone walls and a single door that locked from outside. The marshals took their names, made a show of writing notes that Caleb knew would never see official records, then left them there. Well, John Henderson said into the silence. This is going well. Margaret laughed, slightly hysterical. We rode 3 days through a blizzard to get locked in a basement. Perfect. They can't hold us forever, Thomas said, but he didn't sound convinced. Evelyn stood at the door, her ear pressed against the wood, listening. Her face was tight with something that looked like recognition. How long? Caleb asked quietly, moving beside her. Until Hale decides what to do with us. She turned to face the group. I'm sorry. I should have seen this coming. Should have known he'd have the federal building covered. It's not your fault, Margaret said. We all knew the risks. Did we? Evelyn's laugh was bitter. Because I don't think you understood what you were getting into. Hale doesn't just fight legal battles. He destroys people, ruins reputations, manufactures evidence, makes witnesses disappear. That's what he's doing right now, deciding how to make us go away. Then we make noise, Caleb said. Bang on the door, demand lawyers, refuse to be quiet until someone who matters pays attention. In a building full of Hale's people, all that'll get us is charges of disturbing the peace. Maybe assault, if we're not careful. Evelyn paced the small room like a caged animal. No, we need to be smarter than that. Got any ideas? Before she could answer, the door opened. But it wasn't the marshals who entered. It was Grant Hale himself. Caleb had seen the man once before, years ago when he'd signed the mortgage papers. But time had been kind to Hale in the way it often is to people who profit from others' misery. He wore an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his face carrying the easy confidence of someone who'd never really lost at anything. He looked at Evelyn, and his smile was terrifying in its warmth. Miss Reed, he said, like greeting an old friend. It's been a long time. Evelyn had gone very still, every muscle locked, and Caleb saw the fear she'd been hiding flash naked across her face. Mr. Hale, I have to admit, when my associates told me someone was making accusations, I didn't expect it to be you. I thought you'd be halfway to California by now. Hale stepped into the room, and the marshals closed the door behind him. But here you are, still fighting your little crusade. It's not little, Evelyn said, and her voice shook only slightly. What you've done to these people is perfectly legal, creative perhaps, but legal. Hale turned his attention to the others, his gaze lingering on each face. Mr. Turner, I recognize you. You're late on your mortgage payment. Because you rigged the terms to be impossible to meet. I offered you financing when no one else would. If you couldn't manage the payments, that's hardly my fault. Hale's expression was reasonable, sympathetic even. And you, Mr. McAllister, 3 months overdue. That's breach of contract. You changed the interest rate without notice, Thomas said. I adjusted rates in accordance with market conditions, as specified in the fine print of your agreement. Again, not my problem if you didn't read carefully. He spoke like a teacher explaining simple concepts to slow students, and Caleb felt rage building in his chest. This man had destroyed his family, killed his wife, as surely as if he'd poisoned her himself, and he stood there acting like it was all just unfortunate business. What do you want? Caleb asked, forcing the words through clenched teeth. Want? Nothing you haven't already agreed to give me. Your land, Mr. Turner. Your ranch, Mr. McAllister. Payment for debts you legally owe. Hale examined his manicured nails. What I don't want is my name dragged through baseless accusations by desperate people who can't accept their own failures. The documents Miss Reed stole prove nothing except her criminal tendencies. Hale turned back to Evelyn. Did you tell your friends how you obtained these supposed evidence? Breaking into my office, stealing confidential business papers? That's a felony, Miss Reed. You could hang for that. Then let's go to trial, Evelyn said. Let a jury see what's in those papers. There won't be a trial, because you're going to give me those documents, walk away from these people, and disappear. Again. Hale's voice hardened. Or I press charges against everyone in this room. Theft, conspiracy, fraud. I'll bury you all in legal proceedings until you've lost everything. You can't I? Ask Mr. Turner how well fighting me has worked out so far. Ask the Bradfords in Kansas how... He stopped, smiled. Oh, wait, you can't. Because little Sarah Bradford died in a fire, didn't she? Tragic accident. So much tragedy seems to follow people who oppose me. The room went deadly silent. Caleb saw it then, the truth beneath Hale's civilized veneer. This wasn't just a corrupt businessman. This was something far more dangerous, a man who saw human lives as pieces on a board, to be moved or removed as strategy required. You killed that child, Evelyn whispered. I did nothing illegal. Can you say the same? Hale adjusted his cuffs. Here's what's going to happen. You'll give me the documents. You'll sign statements saying you were mistaken, that your accusations were based on misunderstanding. Then you'll go home and make your overdue payments or accept foreclosure quietly, like civilized people. And if we refuse, Thomas asked, then tomorrow morning you'll all be charged with criminal conspiracy. Your families will be evicted from your properties immediately. Your children will be placed with the territorial orphanage pending investigation of your fitness as parents. And Miss Reed will hang for theft and murder. Murder? Caleb said. The fire that killed Sarah Bradford started in the boarding house where Miss Reed was staying the night before. Quite suspicious, don't you think? Almost like someone wanted to destroy evidence of their crimes. Hale's smile was poisonous. I have witnesses who will testify to seeing her near the building with a lamp. Maybe she started that fire deliberately. Maybe she's a murderer as well as a thief. That's a lie, Evelyn said, but her voice had gone hollow. It's whatever the jury believes, and juries tend to believe respectable businessmen over desperate criminals. Hale moved toward the door, then paused. I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you until morning to think it over. Documents for your freedom. Seems like a fair trade. He left, the door locking behind him with a finality that felt like a tomb ceiling. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Margaret started crying quietly, and Thomas held her while staring at nothing. John Henderson sat with his head in his hands. Evelyn stood frozen against the wall, her face white as bone. Caleb felt the last of his hope crumbling, replaced by a despair so complete it had weight. They'd failed. Worse than failed. They'd walked straight into Hale's trap, delivered themselves and their families into his hands. By morning, they'd lose everything. The farms, the children, any chance of justice. I'm sorry. Evelyn's voice cut through the silence. This is my fault. I brought you into this. I should have known he'd be ready. We all chose to come, Thomas said tiredly. But I gave you hope when there wasn't any. I told you we could win. She laughed bitterly. I believed my own lies. Caleb looked at her standing there, small and defeated, and felt something shift in his chest. They'd lost the battle maybe, but the war wasn't over yet. Give me the documents, he said. What? The documents. Give them to me. Caleb, if we hand them over, we're not handing them over, we're using them. He moved to Evelyn, gripping her shoulders. You said Hale destroys people because they fight him alone. Small battles he can control. But what if we make it bigger than he can contain? How? There's more than one judge in this territory, more than one newspaper, people who owe Hale nothing, who might actually care about justice. Caleb felt the idea crystallizing. We can't beat him in his territory, playing by his rules, so we change the game. He'll have us arrested before we get 10 feet outside this building, John said. Maybe, but maybe not if we're loud enough, public enough. Make it impossible for him to make us disappear quietly. Caleb turned to the others. Tomorrow morning, when they come for our answer, we don't give it to them. We make them drag us out of here. Fighting, shouting, making sure everyone in that building knows what Hale is doing. That's suicide, Thomas said. It's a chance, more than we've got if we surrender. Caleb looked at each of them. I'm not saying this will work. I'm saying it's the only move we've got left. But I won't force anyone. If you want to take Hale's deal, I understand. Margaret wiped her eyes, then straightened. I didn't ride 3 days through a blizzard to quit now. Let's make some noise. John nodded slowly. My son lost his inheritance to that bastard. If I'm going down, I want him to remember my name. Thomas looked at his wife, and something passed between them. All right, we fight. They all turned to Evelyn, who stood with her arms wrapped around herself, trembling slightly. I have a better idea, she said quietly. What? I turn myself in, alone. Say I coerced you all, that you had nothing to do with the stolen documents. Hale gets his revenge on me, and the rest of you go free. Absolutely not, Caleb said. It makes sense. I'm the one he really wants. The one he's been hunting for 2 years. If I give him that, he might let you go. Or he might take you and destroy us anyway. You said it yourself. Hale doesn't leave loose ends. Caleb stepped closer. We're in this together now, all of us. That means we win together or we lose together. You have children waiting for you, Caleb. I can't go home and tell my daughter that we abandoned someone who needed our help. I can't teach my sons that you quit when things get hard. He took her hand, feeling how cold her skin was. You asked me if I trusted you. I'm asking you to trust us now. Trust that we know what we're choosing. Evelyn looked at their joined hands, then at the others watching with determination on their tired faces. Something in her expression cracked, and tears slid down her cheeks. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Neither did you deserve to run for 2 years. But here we are. Caleb squeezed her hand. So what's the plan? How do we make Hale pay? Evelyn wiped her face, and when she looked up, the fear was still there, but something else burned alongside it. The same thing that had made her steal those documents in the first place. The same thing that had kept her running but fighting for 2 years. Not courage, exactly. Justice. We need to get word to Judge Garrett directly, she said. Bypass everyone Hale owns and get the documents straight to someone who might actually care. How? We're locked in a basement. We make them move us. 'Cause enough trouble that they have to deal with us publicly. Evelyn's mind was clearly working now, strategy replacing despair. Then one of us breaks away, gets to Garrett, the rest create distractions. That's barely a plan, John said. It's what we've got. They spent the night preparing, going over details, accepting the likelihood that they wouldn't all make it out of this free or uninjured. The documents were divided, some in Evelyn's coat lining, some sewn into Caleb's vest, insurance against complete loss. As dawn approached, Caleb found himself sitting beside Evelyn against the cold stone wall, shoulder to shoulder in the dark. What will you do? She asked quietly. If we win, when this is over. Rebuild, I guess. Fix everything I let fall apart. He paused. Keep you on for more than $3 a week. She laughed softly. Is that an offer? It's a promise, if you want it. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Your children need stability, not someone like me. My children need someone who shows them that fighting for what's right matters. Someone strong and brave who doesn't quit when things get hard. Caleb turned to look at her. That's you, Evelyn. That's who you are. You don't know me, Caleb. Not really. I know enough. I know you stayed when you could have run. I know you care about people even when you pretend not to. I know Emma loves you and Rebecca respects you and Daniel wants to be like you. He reached for her hand in the darkness. I know I don't want to do this alone anymore. Do what? Any of it. The farm, raising kids, fighting bastards like Hale, living. His voice roughened. Sarah was the best thing that ever happened to me, and losing her almost killed me. But you helped me remember how to breathe again, how to hope. And I don't want to lose that. Evelyn's fingers tightened on his. What if I'm not brave enough? Then we'll be brave together. They sat in the dark, holding hands like frightened children, waiting for whatever morning would bring. And when the first gray light began seeping under the door, Caleb felt Evelyn squeeze his hand once, hard, before letting go and standing up. Time to make some noise, she said. The marshals came at 8 o'clock with coffee and hard biscuits, clearly expecting broken people ready to accept defeat. What they got instead was 5 angry homesteaders who'd spent the night preparing for war. Mr. Hale wants your answer, the tall marshal said, setting the tray just inside the door. Tell Mr. Hale, Evelyn said clearly, that he can go straight to hell. The marshal's expression hardened. That's not smart, lady. Smart would have been staying in Kansas and keeping my head down. But I'm done being smart. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice rising. Grant Hale is a criminal who's been defrauding homesteaders for years, and we have documentation proving it. We demand to see Judge Garrett immediately. You're in no position to demand anything. Then arrest us, charge us publicly, put us in front of a magistrate where we can present our evidence. She smiled, sharp as broken glass. Or are you afraid of what might come out in open court? The marshal's hand moved to his gun, and Caleb tensed, ready to move if this turned violent. But Thomas was already stepping forward, his voice booming. Is this how federal law works in Wyoming? Locking citizens in basements for trying to report crimes? He turned toward the door, projecting his voice into the hallway beyond. We came here seeking justice, and instead we're being held without charge on the orders of a corrupt businessman. Shut your mouth, the second marshal growled. Why? Afraid someone might hear, might ask questions? John Henderson joined in, his voice equally loud. "We're American citizens with evidence of fraud, and we're being silenced because Grant Hale owns this building." The commotion was working. Caleb could hear movement in the hallway, voices asking what was happening. The marshals exchanged uncertain glances, clearly not prepared for resistance this public. "You need to calm down," the tall marshal said, but his voice had lost its authority. "We'll calm down when we see Judge Garrett," Margaret said, and her voice carried the righteous fury of a woman who'd nearly frozen to death for this chance. "You can't keep us quiet. You can't make us disappear. People know we're here. People will ask questions." It was a bluff. No one knew they were here except Hale's people, but it landed. The marshal's face flushed with anger and uncertainty. "Fine. You want to see the judge? I'll take you to the judge." He gestured roughly. "All of you, move. Now." They filed out into a hallway that had filled with curious onlookers, clerks, lawyers, citizens conducting morning business. Exactly what they'd hoped for. Witnesses. "These people are making false accusations against a respected citizen," the marshal announced, clearly trying to control the narrative. "They're being escorted to proper authorities." "False accusations?" Evelyn's voice rang through the corridor. "Is that what you call documented evidence of fraud, forgery, and bribery?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A well-dressed man with a notebook, a reporter, Caleb realized, pushed forward with interest. "What kind of evidence?" the reporter asked. "Don't answer that," the marshal ordered. "Financial records proving Grant Hale has been running illegal foreclosure schemes across 3 counties, Evelyn said anyway. Falsified assessments, forged signatures, bribes to county officials, all documented." "She's lying," the marshal said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then let Judge Garrett determine that," Caleb added. "Let us present our evidence in open court, unless there's a reason Mr. Hale doesn't want these documents examined." The reporter was writing furiously now, and other people were paying attention, their morning routine interrupted by something far more interesting than paperwork. The marshals were trapped between maintaining order and avoiding a scene that was rapidly spinning beyond their control. "Everyone back to business," the tall marshal said, trying to assert authority. "Nothing to see here." But there was something to see, and the crowd knew it. Caleb caught Evelyn's eye and saw the same calculation he was making. They had an audience now. They had momentum. They needed to push harder. "My wife nearly died getting here," Thomas said, his arm around Margaret. "We rode 3 days through a blizzard because we thought federal law meant something, because we believed justice existed. Was that naive?" "We just want to be heard," Caleb added, pitching his voice to Carrie. "If our evidence is false, let it be examined and dismissed. But if it's true, doesn't Judge Garrett have a responsibility to look at it?" The marshals were conferring in urgent whispers, clearly out of their depth. This was supposed to be simple. Intimidate some desperate farmers, make them go away quietly. Instead, they had a crowd, a reporter, and 5 people who refused to be silent. "All right," the tall marshal said finally. "Judge Garrett's chambers, now, but any more outbursts and you'll be charged with disturbing the peace." They were herded up 2 flights of stairs, their small group growing as curious onlookers followed. The reporter stayed close, his questions coming rapid fire. "How long has this been going on? How many families are affected? Do you have proof?" Evelyn fielded the questions with precision, giving enough detail to be credible without revealing everything. Caleb watched her work and saw the woman she must have been before running, confident, articulate, unafraid. 2 years of hiding had buried that person, but she was emerging now, forged harder by what she'd endured. Judge Garrett's chambers occupied the entire 3rd floor, a suite of offices that proclaimed federal authority through dark wood and leather-bound law books. The clerk who met them at the door looked alarmed at the procession. "The judge isn't seen anyone this morning," she said firmly. "He's seen us," Evelyn replied. "I'm sorry, but you need an appointment." "We're here on urgent business," the tall marshal interrupted. "These people claim to have evidence of criminal activity. The judge needs to determine if there's substance to their accusations." The clerk's expression suggested this was highly irregular, but she disappeared into an inner office. Caleb used the wait to study their surroundings. This was federal territory, theoretically outside Hale's direct influence. But theoretically and actually were different things, and he knew better than to assume safety. The clerk returned. Judge Garrett will see you. 5 minutes. They were ushered into an office that managed to be both impressive and austere. Judge Samuel Garrett sat behind a massive desk, a man in his 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human behavior and weren't easily impressed. He looked at the 5 dusty travelers and one nervous marshal with an expression that gave nothing away. "I'm told you have accusations to make," Garrett said. "Speak." Caleb had planned a careful introduction, a measured presentation, but standing in front of this man who represented their last hope, the words came out raw and unfiltered. Grant Hale has been destroying families across Wyoming for years. He offers loans with terms designed to fail, then forecloses and takes everything. My wife worked herself to death trying to meet his payments. Thomas McAllister is losing his ranch. John Henderson lost his son's inheritance, and there are dozens more. "These are serious allegations," Garrett said. "Do you have evidence?" Evelyn stepped forward, reaching into her coat. The marshal's hand went to his gun, but she moved slowly, deliberately, extracting the documents sewn into the lining. 5 years of financial records from Grant Hale's Kansas operations, she said, placing them on the desk. Falsified land assessments, forged signatures on loan modifications, records of bribes paid to county officials and territorial employees. It's all here. Garrett picked up the first document, his expression neutral. He read for a long moment, then looked up. "How did you obtain these?" "I worked for Mr. Hale as his bookkeeper. When I discovered what he was doing, I took copies of the incriminating documents." "So you stole them?" "I preserved evidence of crimes." "The law doesn't generally distinguish based on motive, Miss Reed, Evelyn Reed." Garrett studied her, then returned to the documents. The room was silent except for the rustle of paper and the marshal's nervous breathing. Caleb felt sweat running down his back despite the cold, everything balanced on this moment. Finally, Garrett set down the papers. "These are certainly interesting," he said carefully, "but they relate to Kansas, not Wyoming. I have no jurisdiction over crimes committed in Kansas territory." Caleb felt the floor drop out from under him. They'd been so focused on the documents, they hadn't considered jurisdiction. "But the same crimes are happening here," Thomas said desperately. "He's using the same methods in Wyoming." "Then you need Wyoming evidence. What I see here might be enough to interest Kansas authorities, but for me to act, I need proof of crimes in my territory." "We have testimony," John said. "Families he's defrauded here." "Testimony is a start, but without documentation." "We have documentation." Caleb pulled the papers from his vest, the ones Evelyn had separated. "Hale holds my mortgage. Here's the original agreement showing a 6% interest rate. And here's the modification he sent 3 months later, raising it to 12%, claiming it was due to territorial requirement changes." He spread more papers on the desk. "Thomas McAllister's loan shows similar alterations. John Henderson's shows forged signatures. We have a pattern of the same fraud he committed in Kansas, just with different victims." Garrett examined the papers with more interest now, his judicial mask slipping to reveal something that might have been anger. "These modifications," he said slowly. "Did you agree to them?" "I didn't know I had a choice," Caleb said. "Hale's lawyer presented them as mandatory territorial compliance, said if I didn't sign, I'd be in violation of land use laws. There are no such laws. I know that now." Garrett picked up another document, then another, his movements becoming more purposeful. The silence stretched until Caleb thought he might scream. "This is insufficient for criminal charges," Garrett said finally, and Caleb's heart sank. "But it's more than sufficient for a full investigation. I'm ordering a territorial audit of Grant Hale's lending practices, effective immediately." Hope sparked. "An audit?" "Every loan he's issued in Wyoming, every foreclosure proceeding, every land transfer. If there's a pattern of fraud, we'll find it." Garrett looked at the marshal. "These people are not to be harassed or intimidated. They're witnesses in a federal investigation. Anyone who interferes with them will answer to this court." The marshal's face had gone pale. "Sir, Mr. Hale is a respected—" "Mr. Hale is a citizen subject to the law like everyone else. See that you remember that." Garrett turned back to Caleb and the others. "I'll need formal statements from each of you. My clerk will take them this afternoon. In the meantime, I suggest you find lodging. This investigation will take weeks." "We can't stay weeks," Thomas said. Our foreclosure deadline is in 6 days. Then consider those proceedings stayed pending the outcome of my investigation. No one loses property until I determine whether these loans were legitimate. Garrett's expression softened slightly. You did the right thing coming here. It took courage. It took desperation, Evelyn said quietly. In my experience, those often look the same. They left the chambers in a daze, barely believing what had happened. The reporter was waiting in the hallway, questions ready, but the marshal intercepted him. No press until after formal statements, he said, clearly trying to salvage some control. Out on the street, standing in pale winter sunlight, they looked at each other with expressions hovering between relief and disbelief. Did that really happen? Margaret asked. I think so, Thomas said. I think we actually won. Not won, Evelyn corrected. But we got a chance. That's more than I expected. Caleb turned to her, seeing the exhaustion and residual fear in her face, but also something new, something that looked like hope. You did it, he said. You stopped running. We did it. All of us. She managed a small smile. Together. They found rooms at a boarding house on the edge of town, cheap but clean, and spent the afternoon giving formal statements to Garrett's clerk. The process was tedious and thorough, every detail documented, every claim verified. By evening, Caleb's hand ached from signing papers and his throat was raw from talking. But it was done. They gathered in the boarding house common room that night, sharing a simple meal and the first genuine relaxation any of them had felt in days. The food was basic but tasted like celebration, and for a while they could almost forget the larger battle still ahead. How long do you think the investigation will take? Margaret asked. Weeks at least, Evelyn said. Maybe months. Garrett will be thorough. And Hale will fight back, John added. He's not just going to accept this. No, Caleb agreed. But now he's fighting a federal judge, not desperate farmers. That's different. Is it, though? Thomas looked troubled. Judges can be pressured. Evidence can disappear. We've seen how Hale operates. Garrett seemed honest, Margaret said. Seemed. But we thought the marshals were honest too, until they locked us in a basement. Thomas shook his head. I'm not saying we give up. I'm saying we need to be ready for Hale's next move. The conversation continued, but Caleb found his attention drifting to Evelyn, who sat slightly apart, staring into the fire with distant eyes. He excused himself and moved to sit beside her. You all right? Just thinking about what comes next. We go home. Wait for the investigation. Try to keep our farms running. And hope Hale doesn't destroy us before Garrett can finish. Evelyn turned to him. You heard Thomas. This isn't over. Hale's going to come after us. Let him. We're not alone anymore. Caleb, you don't understand what he's capable of. The things he's done. I understand enough. He took her hand, not caring who saw. I understand he killed a child. I understand he's been ruining lives for years. I understand he's dangerous. But I also understand that we're not running anymore. Neither of us. Evelyn looked at their joined hands, and he saw her wavering between fear and something else. Your children, she said quietly, they need you safe, need you there. They need me to be someone worth respecting, someone who fights for what's right. Caleb squeezed her fingers. And they need you too. Emma said so herself. Emma's 6 years old. She doesn't understand. She understands you care about her, about all of them, that you stayed when you could have left. He paused. When are you going to stop punishing yourself for what Hale did? I enabled him. I kept his books, helped him run his schemes, until you didn't, until you risked everything to stop him. Caleb made her look at him. You're not defined by your worst moment, Evelyn. You're defined by what you chose to do after. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. I'm scared. So am I. But we're scared together, and that makes it bearable. They sat in silence, hands clasped, while the fire burned low and the others gradually retired to their rooms. When it was just the two of them, Evelyn finally spoke. What happens when we go back? Assuming Garrett's investigation protects us, assuming Hale doesn't find a way around it, what then? Then we rebuild. Fix the farms, pay off the legitimate debts, start over. And me? What about you? I don't have a farm, Don't have land or family or anywhere I belong. Her voice was small, vulnerable. Once this is over, once Hale is dealt with, what's my place in any of this? Caleb had thought about this, lying awake in the dark while they waited for morning, had imagined possibilities and futures that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Come back with me, he said, not as hired help, as a partner. Help me run the farm, raise the kids, build something real. Caleb, I'm not asking you to replace Sarah. She was my wife and I'll always love her. But she's gone, and I'm here. And so are you. He touched her cheek, brushing away a tear. I don't want to do this alone anymore. And I don't think you do either. I don't know how to be part of a family. Neither did I, 8 months ago. We'll figure it out together. Evelyn leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. What if I'm not good at it? Then you'll be not good at it with people who care about you anyway. She laughed through tears, and it was the first real laugh he'd heard from her, raw and broken and beautiful. All right, she whispered. All right. They returned home 3 days later, the investigation officially underway, and their foreclosures stayed. The ride back was easier than the journey out, the weather clear and their spirits cautiously optimistic. They parted ways at the crossroads, Thomas and Margaret heading to their ranch, John to his, leaving Caleb and Evelyn to ride the last miles alone. Nervous? Caleb asked as his cabin came into view. Terrified, Evelyn admitted. What if the children don't want me there? What if Rebecca still doesn't trust me? Then we'll work on it. Give it time. But his worries proved unfounded. They crested the last hill and saw all 4 children in the yard, clearly watching for them. Emma spotted them first and came running, her small legs churning through snow, her voice carrying across the distance. Miss Reed, you came back. Evelyn dismounted before the horse fully stopped and caught the little girl, lifting her up as Emma wrapped around her like a vine. Over Emma's head, Caleb saw tears streaming down Evelyn's face. Told you I would, Evelyn managed. Rebecca approached more cautiously, studying Evelyn with those 2 old eyes. You're really staying. If you'll have me. Rebecca looked at her father, some question in her gaze, and Caleb nodded. His daughter's face broke into a smile. Good. Someone needs to keep Pa from burning dinner. Even the twins seemed genuinely happy to see them, Joseph chattering about everything that had happened while they were gone, Daniel standing tall and proud beside his repaired fence. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Caleb found Evelyn on the porch in her usual spot. But this time when he joined her, she didn't maintain careful distance. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and they watched stars emerge in a sky so vast it seemed to contain infinite possibilities. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. For seeing something worth saving. I could say the same to you. Caleb wrapped his arm around her shoulders. We saved each other, Evelyn. That's what partners do. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Cheyenne. Judge Garrett's investigation had uncovered enough evidence to bring formal charges against Grant Hale. Fraud, forgery, bribery, conspiracy. The trial was set for spring, and they'd all be called to testify. But there was other news too. Hale had disappeared. His office in Cheyenne was abandoned, his accounts emptied, his associates claiming ignorance. Federal marshals were searching, but so far he'd vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. He's running, Evelyn said, reading the letter over Caleb's shoulder. Like I did. You think he'll come back? Men like Hale always come back. They can't help themselves. But she didn't sound afraid anymore, just watchful. Life settled into new rhythms over the following weeks. The foreclosure stayed in place, and other families began emerging from Hale's shadow, sharing their stories, adding their voices to the growing case against him. The territorial newspapers picked up the story, and suddenly Grant Hale's name was synonymous not with success, but with corruption. Caleb worked his farm with renewed purpose, Daniel at his side, the 2 of them repairing years of neglect. Rebecca and Evelyn managed the house with quiet efficiency, and sometimes Caleb would catch them laughing together over some private joke. Emma followed Evelyn everywhere, a small shadow learning to be strong. One evening in late February, as the first hints of spring touched the air, Evelyn found Caleb at Sarah's grave on the hill. He'd been coming up here less frequently, the visits evolving from grief pilgrimage to peaceful remembrance. "I should have asked," Evelyn said quietly, "if it's all right, me being here." "Sarah would have liked you," Caleb said. "She had a soft spot for fighters." "I'm not much of a fighter." "You're the strongest person I know." Evelyn moved to stand beside him, looking at the simple wooden cross. "Tell me about her?" So he did. Not the sanitized version he'd given the children, but the real Sarah. Her terrible singing voice, her competitive streak at cards, the way she'd cried at everything from sad stories to beautiful sunsets. The woman who'd loved him despite his flaws and made him believe he could be better. "She sounds wonderful," Evelyn said when he finished. She was. "And she's gone, and that broke something in me I thought couldn't be fixed." Caleb took Evelyn's hand. "But you're here, and I'm learning that maybe healing isn't about going back to who you were before. Maybe it's about becoming someone new. Someone who can carry both the past and the future." Something like that. They stood in the gathering dusk, two people who'd been broken by different hands but found wholeness in each other. Below them, the cabin glowed with lamplight, and children's voices drifted up carrying laughter and argument and life. "Think we can make this work?" Evelyn asked. "All of it?" "I think we don't have a choice. We're already halfway there." She smiled, leaning against him. "Then I guess we better finish what we started." Spring came early that year, melting snow into mud and promise. The land awakened slowly, tentatively, as if testing whether it was safe to hope again. Caleb watched green push through frozen earth and saw it as metaphor, life persisting despite everything trying to crush it. The farm was changing. Daniel had become his true partner, the boy growing into competence that would have made Sarah proud. They'd repaired the barn, replaced rotted fence posts, cleared fields for spring planting. The work was endless but no longer felt futile, because they were building towards something instead of just delaying inevitable collapse. Inside the cabin, transformation was equally profound. Rebecca had stopped being a child forced into motherhood and started being simply a child again, her laughter returning like birdsong after winter. The twins fought and played with normal sibling chaos, no longer walking on eggshells around their father's grief. And Emma bloomed like the wildflowers beginning to dot the hillsides, her joy infectious and complete. Evelyn had become the center around which they all orbited. Not replacing Sarah, no one could do that, but creating something new. She was harder than Sarah, less given to open affection, but the children understood that her love expressed itself through teaching Daniel to think strategically, through sitting with Rebecca during nightmares, through letting Emma help with tasks that would have been faster done alone, through staying when leaving would have been easier. Caleb found himself watching Evelyn at odd moments, cataloging small details. The way she tucked hair behind her ear when concentrating, the rare smile that transformed her entire face, the careful distance she still maintained in public, as if afraid to claim happiness too openly lest it be taken away. He understood. He felt the same wariness, the same sense that peace was temporary and fragile. They were right to be cautious. Grant Hale returned on a Tuesday in late March, riding into Caleb's yard like he owned it, which technically he still did until Judge Garrett's ruling became final. He arrived with two men Caleb didn't recognize, hard-faced individuals who carried themselves like violence was a familiar tool. Caleb was in the field with Daniel when he saw them. His first instinct was to run for the rifle. His second was to send Daniel to get help. But Evelyn was in the cabin with the other children, and leaving her unprotected wasn't an option. "Daniel, get to the McAllisters," Caleb said quietly. "Fast as you can. Tell Thomas to bring whoever he can gather. Pa, I should stay. Go! Now!" The boy hesitated only a moment before sprinting toward the barn, and the horse kept saddled for emergencies. Caleb watched him go, then turned and walked deliberately toward his cabin and the man who'd destroyed so much. Hale stood on the porch like he belonged there, his expensive clothes incongruous against the rough timber. He looked thinner than Caleb remembered, harder around the edges, but his smile was the same, confident and cruel. "Mr. Turner," Hale said pleasantly, "we need to talk. I've got nothing to say to you that won't wait for Judge Garrett's courtroom." "Ah, but I have plenty to say to you, and to Miss Reed." Hale's gaze moved past Caleb to where Evelyn had emerged from the cabin, the other children clustered behind her. There she is, my former employee. The thief. The witness, Evelyn corrected, moving to stand beside Caleb. The one who's going to testify about every crime you committed. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. Hale descended the porch steps, his companions flanking him with casual menace. See, I've been thinking about this situation, about the investigation, the charges, the inevitable trial, and I've realized something important. What's that? Caleb asked, though he knew better than to engage. That none of it matters if there are no witnesses. The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Caleb felt Evelyn tense beside him, her hand moving subtly toward the knife she kept in her belt. Behind them, he heard Rebecca gathering the younger children, moving them back inside. You can't intimidate all of us, Evelyn said. There are a dozen families ready to testify. Kill us, and you just prove everything we've said about you. Kill you? Hale laughed. My dear Miss Reed, I'm a businessman, not a murderer, though I understand you've been accused of that particular crime yourself. That fire in Kansas was quite tragic. You started that fire. Can you prove it? Because I have witnesses who'll say otherwise. Witnesses who'll testify they saw you near the boarding house with a lamp, acting suspicious. Witnesses who'll swear you had motive, destroying evidence of your own theft before fleeing town. Caleb saw the color drain from Evelyn's face and felt rage building in his chest. That's a lie. Is it? Or is it just a different version of events? Courts love versions, juries especially. Hale's smile widened. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return my stolen documents. Miss Reed is going to sign a confession admitting she fabricated evidence against me. And you, Mr. Turner, are going to withdraw your testimony and accept foreclosure quietly. And if we refuse, then Miss Reed hangs for murder and arson. Your children go to the territorial orphanage while you stand trial for conspiracy. The McAllisters, the Hendersons, everyone who spoke against me faces similar charges. Hale pulled out a sheaf of legal papers. I have warrants here, signed by a territorial judge. Very legal, very official. Garrett stayed the foreclosures. Garrett is one federal judge. I have friends throughout the territorial government, friends who owe me favors, friends who will make your lives very difficult if you continue this crusade. Hale stepped closer. You fought well. You should be proud. But you're outmatched. Accept reality and walk away with your children and your freedom. It's more than most people get. Caleb looked at the papers, then at Hale, then at Evelyn standing rigid beside him. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd risked, coming down to this moment. Accept defeat and keep the fragments of their lives, or fight and lose everything. No, Evelyn said quietly. Hale raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not running anymore. I'm not letting you destroy anyone else. Her voice strengthened. You can threaten us, charge us, drag us through every court in the territory, but I'm not backing down. Then you'll hang. Maybe, but at least I'll die fighting instead of running. Hale's expression hardened, the pleasant facade cracking. You're being foolish, both of you. This isn't some frontier story where the righteous triumph through pure determination. This is reality, and in reality, power wins. I have power. You have nothing. We have the truth, Caleb said. Truth is what people believe, and I control what they believe. You used to. A new voice cut through the tension, and everyone turned to see Judge Garrett riding into the yard, accompanied by 2 federal marshals. Different ones than before, Caleb noted. Behind them came Thomas McAllister and 6 other men, all armed, all watching Hale's companions with hard eyes. Garrett dismounted with the stiff movements of a man unaccustomed to long rides. He looked at Hale with an expression that could have frozen water. Grant Hale, I wondered when you'd surface. Judge Garrett, this is a private property matter. This is a federal investigation into territorial fraud, and you're attempting to intimidate witnesses. Garrett gestured to the marshals. Arrest him. On what charges? Hale demanded, but there was fear in his voice now. For a start, 15 counts of fraud, 8 counts of forgery, 12 counts of bribery, and 1 count of arson resulting in death. Garrett pulled out his own papers. I've spent the last 6 weeks following the trail you left across 3 territories. The fire in Kansas? The territorial marshal there is very interested in speaking with you about that. Seems there are witnesses who saw your men starting it, then trying to blame Miss Reed. Hale's face went white. That's impossible. Those witnesses are dead? Yes, you tried very hard to make them disappear. But people talk before they die, Mr. Hale. And their statements, properly witnessed and notarized, make for compelling evidence. The marshals moved forward, but Hale's companions shifted to block them. The tension ratcheted up, hands moving to weapons, and Caleb pulled Evelyn back toward the cabin. Don't be stupid, Garrett said to Hale's men. You're outnumbered and outmatched. Federal marshals plus armed citizens who've all suffered under your employer's schemes. Walk away and I'll forget I saw you. Fight and you'll hang beside him. The two men exchanged glances, then slowly backed away, hands raised. Smart men, Caleb thought. Smart enough to know when they'd lost. Hale stood alone, his confident facade completely shattered. You can't prove any of this. I already have. Your former associates in Kansas were very forthcoming once they understood they could save themselves by testifying against you. Your bookkeepers, your lawyers, even the judges you bribed, everyone started talking. Garrett nodded to the marshals, who moved in to restrain Hale. You built an empire on other people's suffering, Mr. Hale. Now you'll answer for every bit of it. As the marshal secured his hands, Hale turned to Evelyn, and his expression was pure venom. This isn't over. I have friends, resources. You have nothing, Evelyn said, and her voice was steady as stone. You're finished. They took him away, loading him onto a horse like common criminal, and Caleb watched the man who'd haunted his life for so long reduced to something small and pathetic. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it just felt like relief. Garrett remained behind as the marshals rode off with their prisoner. He stood surveying the homestead with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. How did you know to come? Caleb asked. Your son rode into town this morning saying Hale was here making threats. I'd been expecting something like this. Men like Hale don't accept defeat gracefully. Garrett smiled slightly. Smart boy you've got there. He learned from his mother. And from his father, I'd wager. Garrett turned to Evelyn. Miss Reed, I owe you an apology. When you first came to my chambers, I was skeptical. Thought you might be an opportunist trying to exploit legitimate business disputes. And now? Now I know you're one of the bravest people I've met. What you did, stealing those documents, running for 2 years, then standing up to testify, that took extraordinary courage. Evelyn ducked her head, uncomfortable with praise. I was just tired of being afraid. Well, you don't have to be afraid anymore. The warrants against you have been dismissed. The fire in Kansas has been ruled arson committed by Hale's associates. You're completely cleared. Caleb saw tears spring to Evelyn's eyes, watched her struggle to maintain composure. He took her hand, squeezing gently, and she gripped back hard enough to hurt. What happens now? Thomas asked, joining them. With our mortgages? Our land? The court will review every loan Hale issued. Those found to be legitimate will be honored at fair market rates. Those involving fraud or coercion will be nullified. Garrett pulled out more papers. Based on what I've seen, Mr. Turner, your mortgage will likely be reduced to the original amount you agreed to before Hale's modifications. Same for you, Mr. McAllister, and most of the others. We can afford that, Caleb said, hardly believing it. With this year's crop, we can actually pay that. Then you'll keep your land, as it should be. The gathering that followed felt like celebration and wake combined. Other families arrived as word spread, the Hendersons, the Kowalskis, the Chengs, all the people who'd suffered under Hale's schemes. They filled Caleb's yard, sharing food and stories and the profound relief of people who'd stared into the abyss and stepped back. Rebecca and Margaret organized the children into games while the adults talked. Emma attached herself to Evelyn's leg, and this time Evelyn didn't try to maintain distance. She picked up the little girl, holding her naturally, and Caleb's heart clenched at the sight. As evening fell and families began departing, Judge Garrett pulled Caleb aside. I want you to understand something, the judge said. What you and Miss Reed did, standing up to Hale, bringing this to light, it matters beyond just your own situations. There are men like Hale all across the territories, exploiting the vulnerable, corrupting the system. Most people just accept it. You fought back. We almost lost. But you didn't, and now others will see that resistance is possible, that justice, however imperfect, can still function. Garrett gripped Caleb's shoulder. You did good work here. Be proud of that. After Garrett left, after the last visitors departed and the children were in bed, Caleb found Evelyn standing at the edge of his property, looking out over land that rolled toward mountains touched by sunset. She held herself with the same rigid tension she'd carried when she first arrived, and he recognized it now as armor against hope. It's really over, he said, joining her. Is it? Hale still has allies, still has money for lawyers. Evelyn, he made her look at him. It's over. He's going to trial. He's going to lose, and we're going to be fine. You can't know that. No, but I can believe it, and so can you if you let yourself. She turned back to the sunset, and he watched emotions play across her face, fear and hope and disbelief and something that might have been joy. I don't know how to do this, she whispered, how to stop waiting for everything to collapse. One day at a time, one moment at a time. Caleb moved closer. And maybe one decision at a time. What decision? He'd been thinking about this for weeks, weighing words and possibilities. Now, with the threat of Hale finally lifted, it felt like the right moment to make it real. Stay, he said simply, not as hired help, not as a temporary solution. Stay as part of this family, as my partner, as... He paused, then pushed forward. As my wife, if you'll have me. Evelyn went very still. Caleb, I can't replace Sarah. I'm not asking you to. Sarah was my first love, and I'll carry her with me always. But she's gone, and I'm here, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life alone. He took her hands. You make me want to be better. You make the children feel safe. You turned a house that was dying into a home that's alive again. I love you, Evelyn, not the same way I loved Sarah, but just as deeply, just as completely. Tears streamed down her face. I'm broken, damaged. I don't know how to... We're all broken. I spent 8 months drowning in grief, failing my children, losing everything that mattered. You spent 2 years running from your past. We found each other in the wreckage, and we built something new. He wiped her tears with his thumbs. You asked me once if I trusted you. Now I'm asking if you trust me, trust this, trust us. Evelyn looked at him through tears, and he saw the exact moment she made the decision. Saw her armor crack and fall away, leaving someone raw and scared but willing to risk it anyway. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay. I'll marry you. Her voice broke. I'll try to be enough. You already are. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, tasting salt and hope. And when she kissed him back, it felt like a promise neither of them had dared make before. They married in late April, standing in front of Caleb's fireplace with the children gathered close and Thomas McAllister serving as witness. It was nothing like Caleb's first wedding. No church, no fancy dress, no crowd of well-wishers, just two people who'd survived separate hells promising to face whatever came next together. Emma insisted on picking wildflowers for Evelyn's hair, and Rebecca stood beside them with fierce pride. The twins fidgeted through the brief ceremony, and Daniel watched with an expression that suggested he was trying not to cry. The circuit preacher spoke about love and partnership and building lives from broken pieces, about how families weren't always born but sometimes chosen, about how the strongest bonds were forged through shared struggle. When Evelyn spoke her vows, her voice shook but didn't break. I promise to stay, to fight beside you instead of running, to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me. And when Caleb responded, he said simply, I promise to see you. Not who you were, not who you think you should be, but who you are. And to love that person every day we have. They sealed it with a kiss while the children cheered and the spring wind carried the scent of growing things through open windows. The trial happened in June, drawing people from 3 territories. Caleb and Evelyn testified, along with dozens of other families Hale had destroyed. The documents were entered as evidence, damning and thorough. Hale's lawyers tried every trick, but Judge Garrett ran a tight courtroom and allowed no games. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Hale was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, his assets seized to provide restitution to his victims. It wouldn't bring back Sarah Bradford or repair all the damage he'd done, but it was justice. Imperfect and incomplete, but real. Caleb and Evelyn stood outside the courthouse afterwards, watching Hale being led away in chains. He didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge their existence. He'd already erased them from his narrative, rewritten himself as the victim of circumstance rather than architect of his own downfall. It didn't matter. He was finished. "How do you feel?" Caleb asked Evelyn as they walked back to the boarding house where they'd left the children. "Empty, almost. I spent 2 years living for this moment, imagining how it would feel to see him punished, and now that it's happened, I just feel—" She paused, searching for words. "Ready to move on." "Good, because we've got a farm to run and children to raise and a whole life waiting." She smiled, and it reached her eyes this time. "A whole life? That sounds impossible." "Most good things do." They collected the children and rode home, the journey feeling shorter than it ever had before. The farm appeared as they crested the final hill, and Caleb saw it through new eyes. Not a failing homestead marking his inadequacy, but land that was healing, fields planted and growing. Fences strong and straight, a cabin that rang with laughter instead of grief. A home. Emma spotted it first and started bouncing in her saddle. "We're almost there. Can I show Miss Reed? Mama. Can I show Mama my garden?" Evelyn had tears in her eyes at the name, but she nodded. "I'd love to see your garden, sweetheart." Rebecca rode close to Caleb, her expression thoughtful. "Are you happy, Pa?" "Yeah, honey, I am." "Good, because we all are too, even when we don't say it." Daniel brought up the rear with Joseph, discussing plans for expanding the barn. Thomas had offered to help, and several other neighbors had volunteered labor. The community that had fractured under Hale's schemes was rebuilding itself, discovering that cooperation was stronger than isolation. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Caleb and Evelyn sat on the porch in what had become their place. The stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. "Tell me something," Evelyn said. "Something you've never told anyone." Caleb thought about it. "When Sarah died, there was a moment, just a moment, when I wanted to die too. Wanted to lie down beside her grave and just stop. The only thing that kept me going was knowing the children needed me. That's not weakness, that's love. What about you? What's something you've never told anyone?" Evelyn was quiet for a long time. "When I took those documents from Hale, I knew it meant I could never stop running. I knew I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, never settling anywhere, never belonging. And part of me thought that was what I deserved, for being complicit, for not stopping him sooner. And now? Now I know I was wrong. I deserved a chance to make things right, deserved forgiveness, deserved—" She gestured at the cabin, the land, the life they'd built. "This." Caleb pulled her close, and they sat watching stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. So much had changed in less than a year. So much had been lost and found and rebuilt. There would be hard times ahead, crops that failed, children who struggled, wounds that never fully healed. But they'd face it together. Two broken people who'd learned that healing didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant carrying it forward while building something new. It meant accepting that love could exist in different forms, that families could be chosen, that justice was possible even when it seemed impossible. It meant staying when running would be easier. It meant fighting when surrender would be simpler. It meant believing that a $3 transaction could become the foundation for everything that mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Evelyn asked, her head on his shoulder. "How we got here. How a desperate man and a running woman found each other in the middle of nowhere." "Sounds like a story." "It is a story. Our story." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "And I think it's just getting started." Inside the cabin, Emma called out in her sleep, and Rebecca's voice murmured something soothing. The twins' breathing created a steady rhythm through the thin walls. Daniel's room was silent, the boy learning to carry responsibility with grace. A family. Not the one Caleb had built with Sarah, but a family nonetheless, forged through struggle and loss and the stubborn refusal to give up when everything seemed lost. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of growing wheat and distant rain. Tomorrow they'd work the fields. Tomorrow they'd continue rebuilding. Tomorrow they'd face whatever challenges frontier life threw at them. But tonight, sitting on a porch in the Wyoming wilderness with a woman who'd risked everything for justice and a cabin full of children who'd learned to hope again, Caleb Turner felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. "I love you," he said quietly. Evelyn lifted her head, meeting his eyes in the starlight. "I love you too, even when it scares me. Especially when it scares you." She laughed, and the sound carried across the prairie like a promise, like a prayer, like the first word of a story that would continue long after this moment passed into memory. The story of two people who found each other in the wreckage, who built a home from broken pieces, who proved that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships become the strongest foundations, who discovered that $3 a week and a desperate gamble could transform into something worth more than all the land in Wyoming: a family, a future, a life worth living. Together.